Chapter 17, Expectations, Output, and Policy. In Chapter 15, we saw how expectations affect stock prices and other asset prices. In Chapter 16, we saw how expectations of future output and real interest rates affected consumption and investment spending. In this chapter, we look at how the presence of expectations about future output and real interest rates changes the impact of monetary and fiscal policy on current output. Learning objectives. Know how the presence of expectations makes the IS curve steeper. Recognize that LM relation is not affected by changes in expected future income and real interest rates. Discuss effect of monetary policy on expected future real interest rates. Recognize that IS curve can shift as a result of monetary expansion or contraction. Learning objectives. Explain what is meant by rational expectations and discuss how it differs from animal spirits and adaptive expectations. Re-examine the effects of fiscal policy and why the effects of, for example, deficit reduction on current output are ambiguous. Figure 17-1 shows how expectations affect consumption and investment decisions both directly and through asset prices. In equation 17.1, consumption and investment spending has been combined and represented by A, which shows aggregate private spending. Equation 17.1 shows the IS relation. Equation 17.2 is an extension of equation 17.1. It says that aggregate private spending depends not only on the current values of the variables y, t, and r, but also on the expected values in the future represented by y prime e, t prime e, and r prime e. Equation 17.2 says increases in either current or expected future income increase private spending. Increases in either current or expected future taxes decrease private spending. Increases in either current or future real interest rate decrease private spending. Figure 17-2 shows the new IS curve, which is steeper than the curve which does not take the effect of expectations into account. Given expectations, a decrease in the real interest rate leads to a small increase in output because a change in the current interest rate has a small effect on spending and the multiplier is small. Increases in government spending or in expected future output shift the IS curve to the right. Increases in taxes, in expected future taxes, or in the expected future real interest rate shift the IS curve to the left. Equation 17.3 is the LM relation you saw earlier as it was derived in Chapter 4. M over P is the supply of money and the right side of the equation is the demand for money. Equilibrium in the financial markets requires that the supply of money be equal to the demand for money. The demand for money depends on real income and on the short-term nominal interest rate, the opportunity cost of holding money. There is no change in the LM relation once we take into account the effect of expectations. Demand for money is a function of current income and the current nominal interest rate. It is not affected by the expected values of these variables in the future. In figure 17-3, the IS curve is steeply downward sloping. Other things being equal, a change in the current interest rate has a small effect on output. The LM curve is upward sloping. The equilibrium is at the intersection of the IS and LM curves in the diagram. In this diagram, it is assumed the expected rate of inflation is 0 in both the current year and in the future. Equation 17.4, the IS relation is the same as equation 17.2. Equation 17.5 states the LM relation in terms of the real interest rate R, which here is equal to the nominal interest rate I, since we are assuming the expected rate of inflation is 0. Remember, real interest rate is approximately equal to the nominal interest rate minus expected current inflation. The rate that the Fed affects directly is the current nominal interest rate. In contrast, spending in the IS relation depends on both current and expected future real interest rates. Economists sometimes state this distinction by saying that while the Fed controls the short-term nominal interest rate, what matters for spending and output is the long-term real interest rate. Figure 17-4 shows the effects of expansionary monetary policy on output depend very much on whether and how monetary policy affects expectations. If the increase in money leads to an increase in Y prime E and a decrease in R prime E, the IS curve shifts to the right, leading to a larger increase in Y. Equilibrium point goes from A to C instead of A to B. Economists refer to expectations formed in this forward-looking manner as rational expectations. This is why central banks often argue that the task is not only to adjust the interest rate, but also to manage expectation so as to lead to predictable effects of changes in the interest rate on the economy. Figure 1 illustrates how the role of expectations is even more central when the economy is in a liquidity trap and short-term interest rate is already equal to zero, as it was at the end of 2008. Until the early 1970s, macroeconomists thought of expectations in terms of animal spirits or simple backward-looking rules where people expected the future to be like the present. In the early 1970s, Robert Lucas and Thomas Sargent spoke about rational expectations, where people form expectations by making predictions about the future by taking all available information about policies into account. The Fed used unconventional monetary policy to increase spending and output. These are referred to as quantitative easing or credit easing. Quantitative easing is the operation in which the Fed continues to increase the money supply while at the zero interest bound by buying treasury bills or longer-term government bonds. The purpose is to increase the money supply. The purpose of credit easing is to lower the interest rate on a specific asset such as mortgage-backed securities or even stocks. The goal in this case is not so much to increase the money supply. Through credit easing, the Fed was able to help the banks by funding them by buying the mortgage-backed securities from them. Secondly, by continuing to expand the money supply, Fed was able to convince borrowers that future nominal interest rates would continue to be low. And thirdly, positive inflationary expectations allowed current and future expected real interest rates to be low, leading to an increase in current spending. It also avoided the deflationary spiral of the 1930s. In November 2008, Fed announced QE1 and in August 2010, QE2. The central bank money more than tripled in size as a result of these measures, as shown in the figure above. It is said to have lowered the rate on long-term bonds by about 0.5%. Figure 17-5 shows that when account is taken of the effect of deficit reduction policies on expectations, the decrease in government spending need not lead to a decrease in output. Decrease in government spending shifts IS curve to the left. Expected future output goes up, shifting IS to the right. The expected future interest rate goes down, shifting IS to the right. Net effect could be such that output may go up in the current period. Table 1 shows that in Ireland, as deficit was reduced from 1981 to 1989, output growth rate initially decreased from 1981 to 1983, but then improved from 1987 to 1989. The first round of deficit reduction was focused on increasing taxes. It did not focus on reducing size of government and hence did not change expectations about the performance of the economy. The second round from 1987 was focused on cutting government spending and reducing the size of government. It changed expectations about future output and real interest rates and therefore increased rate of growth of output and decreased unemployment.